Welcome, fellow golfers. We're outside today, so we're going to be talking about putting. I'm going to break it probably into two, maybe three parts, but certainly two parts. Putting, I think I'd like to say initially, is an art form, but as with all art, you need a framework and you need an easel and you need to have all the mechanics and the parts there to be able to then create and use the feel. So whilst it sounds a bit flowery, it isn't. Putting is 100% technique and 100% feel. We can make a great stroke that misses, we can make a bad stroke that goes in, but we want to try and make as many and as consistent a stroke as we can. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about short putts, sort of 3 foot, let's say, and in. That's where I would say that I want you to be mechanically sound. I think more putts are missed from 3 foot by bad strike and bad setup than they are by probably misreading it, I think, because you realistically, right edge, left edge, middle of the hole. Okay, if you're playing at Augusta, you might have some outside right, outside left putts. I don't play that often at Augusta, but although in the sim I have played a few times, and course record 63 is nothing. I don't know why people haven't shot less than that, to be honest. You believe that, you believe anything. Okay, there are only two determinant factors as to whether a putt goes in, whether it be a foot, 60 foot, 6,000 foot, a little bit long probably, and that is pace and line. Pace is always, I'm going to say, more important than line, and the longer the putt becomes, probably the more the pace is important. I would say if you had a 30 or 40 foot putt, pace is probably 90% of that, line is going to be 10%. Look at my maths there. But as we get to a short putt, and we're looking down here, let's say, and we've got a sort of 2-3 foot putt here, I'm going to argue that pace and line become as important as each other. Okay, we're going to talk about the setup now. Now that's going to help with this, okay, and we're going to talk about the stroke as well. So we talked earlier about pace and line, and we talked about building a stroke. Now it is a bit of an art form, as I've said, but I would argue short putts, let's say 2, 3, 4 foot and in, are very mechanical as opposed to 24 foot putts, which are much more feel orientated. So we've talked about that earlier. And what I mean by that is if we had, let's say, a 3 foot putt here, as you can see, roughly the length of my putter here. This putt, with the exception of pace and line, is going to be the same whether I'm putting it here at Chesterfield, where the greens are fantastic, whether I'm playing Augusta, always playing that every other week, or I'm playing Pebble Beach, or I'm playing at, I don't know, TPC Sawgrass. Strangely, I'm not playing at either of those two places next week, but I'm still waiting for the invite. So a 3 foot putt doesn't really change. The pace may be slightly different, but the mechanics are going to be the same. So if we built a machine, let's say, my hands aren't quite straight enough, and it would just, to hold 3 foot putts, it would just do the same thing over and over again. Now, Chesterfield, we're here in March. The greens are fantastic, but they're nowhere near as quick as Augusta next month, or Pebble Beach, or I think TPC Sawgrass. So a 24 foot or 3 foot putt would be a very different stroke, and it would require a different stroke. A downhill 23 foot putt at TPC Sawgrass is probably quite short in relationship to a 23 foot uphill putt on these greens. Pretty much we're only just out of winter, so that would require a longer stroke and a more feely stroke. So 24 foot putt is going to be very different at Augusta to here, but a 3 or 4 2 foot putt is going to be very similar. So we want to have the same machine like for the short ones, and for the longer ones we want to have a more feely, same strike, same quality of strike, but it's going to be more feely. Okay, so what we're now going to talk about is setup. These are key core components that I think, if you look at golf and you watch golf on TV, obviously, or you watch golf on YouTube and you watch any good player, they all have different putters. They've all got different stances to a point. They've all got different grips to a point. There are far more than when I was playing. We used to have sort of what we call reverse overlap, and we used to have cack-handed if you were struggling. Now we've got like 400 different grips. The deal with it, we have belly, we have chin, we have God knows what other putters, up your slate, up your arm, up your left arm, round, under, between your legs, whatever. There are so many different setups, but the key components that we're going to be looking for are, firstly, we have to have the putter face set up squarely, i.e. right angles, to the line I want the ball to go on. Obviously, every putt we hit is straight. Slope, wind, sometimes bounce, not on these greens because they're good, but slope and bounce and wind and grain will move putts. So we have to pick a line that we're going to putt along, and hopefully gravity and whatever will take care of the rest. That's why there's always a bit of an art form feeling as to how much it's going to go. And there is a skill in reading greens, and we'll talk about that another day. So the first thing is we have to get the putter face at 90 degrees to where we want to go. That is always the number one requirement. I don't want to use my feet for this operation, if you want to call it that. So I always have my feet standing slightly to the left of it, and I'm going to put my putter face down at right angles to the line I want it to go on. I'm going to use my right hand to do that, because this would be my feel hand, despite as it is, this is my feel hand. So I'm always going to put the putter down first with my right hand. So we've also got to get our eye line over the ball here. And what that means by that is if I was to put that pink stick there, try and get it parallel to the camera roughly, what I need is my eye line parallel to that pink stick, i.e. over the golf ball here. So when I set up, if we talk about posture, I want relatively straight knees. I think if you watch most good putters, they're relatively straight kneed and they're quite round shouldered at the top half. So we're very relaxed here. We want to let our arms hang, but we want to have our eye line over the ball. So best way to do that is if I set this up here where I would naturally do it, I then put a ball on the bridge of my nose, drop it. Can you see how it basically drops where that ball is there? So again, from the front, there's a lot of different putters. They have different widths. As I said to you earlier, there's a number of different sort of setups in inverted commas, but the same key components you see with all good putters. So every good putter has whatever foot width they want. They can stand slightly open, sometimes shut. I can only think of one or two that were very good at being shut, but generally most putters will be open. But the core components, as we've just said about, their eye lines are always over the ball. And I think the second thing with the setup here is their shoulder line is always parallel, the same as their eye line to where they want to go. There's the odd one that's slightly different, but as a general rule, if you watch most good putters, really good putters, world-class putters, they're going to set up, obviously, putter head squarely. They've got their palm, we'll talk grip in a second, their eye line and their shoulder line are parallel. Most of them will have their feet, I think, parallel to slightly open, but it's always about having that eye line or chest line. And if you go back to the old school, you know, you're back to your Ben Crenshaws and all of those, Larry Misey kind of thing, they were very open in their feet and they were beautifully arched here, which we'll talk about in a second. But they had that, their shoulders are always square, but they were open in that bottom half. While we're talking about that, we'll just talk a little bit about ball position. Ball position for me should be always forward of centre. Again, little bit kind of up to you. If your feet are narrow, it might feel a little more towards the centre. I never really want it back of middle, although you could still hit it back of middle and putt. But so we always want to have that ball position slightly forward of middle. Okay, so we're going to talk about grip. Two things that are massively key, I think, for me. All good putters have a much more upright grip than you would have for a normal shot. Normal shot, we would let the arms hang. We would have the thumb, as we've talked about before, a little bit longer here, and that would allow hinge, and that allows angle in the backswing here. When we putt, we don't really want to use our wrist. So actually what we want is a more upright position here, and that we would call is arched here. And can you see how my palms are now facing each other? So one of the things, and we know that there are a million different grips, as we say, pencil, pen, I don't know, biro, there's claw, reverse claw, 300 claws, something here, whatever, seen loads. But in the basic rule of thumb, I want my palms facing each other. So I don't really care how they are on the grip overly. If we were to go the classic, what we call reverse overlap, you would have your right palm here. So can you see how my thumb is just down the right side of centre there of the grip? And then I'd let my left thumb sit down the left side of centre here, and we would arch it slightly. Now, one thing that I am very, very, if you want to call it, passionate about, or I think is important, is I want all of my right hand on the grip. All right, at the moment I can't get all of my right hand on the grip, but I want all of my right palm and my right hand on the grip. I don't care if you go claw, pencil, whatever you want to do here, but this right hand is your feel hand, and this left hand to a point is your guiding hand. So I think this one's the one that we're going to lock more, hence we want to have that more arched position here. I always like that arched position. You can see here where we call it arched here, so we've got it up and locked. That means when I make the stroke, this is kind of working in a nice straightish line. It's obviously not a straight line, but we'll talk about that again. But what I want to feel is that right hand is always on there first. And I think what I see a lot is I see too many people with their right hand too far on top of the club here. Now, when you get your right hand too far on a club, especially when you've got these fatter grips now, don't necessarily love this one. It's just the putter came. I love the putter, but it came with it. What can you see how my right elbow then gets a little bit higher as soon as I get this hand too far on top, and now it's very hard to make that putting stroke. So if you watch really good putters, if anything, they're slightly underneath. There was a guy back in the good old days who was one of the best putters they reckon ever, got a guy called Paul Runyon, and he's one of my little kind of go-tos. And he used to putt with his thumbs, and there's some great stories about him in, I think, the 20s and the 30s, about they had to change the size of the hole and so on because he was so good at putting and everyone was a bit upset about it. But what we'll see here is, can you see how my palms are really opposite and my thumbs are almost down either side of the grip? If I do that, can you see how my fingers kind of have to wrap around here? But what that does is it really locks those wrists in place. If I go that way, can you see now immediately it's very hard to work it. So we always want to feel more upright, and I would say down my lifeline if that's it. I'll probably just cut my lifeline there, but life is in half. We want to be much more upright. We never want to have our hands low in here. Okay, so we're now going to talk about the mechanics of the stroke. So we've talked about the setup, ball position, eye line over it, nice and relaxed. As we've said, we can have, I think, the only other thing I would add in, although we want to be upright in our hands here, I think I remember reading or seeing something which I thought was brilliant. Someone said to me, if you put your hands out with your arms straight and then pull your elbows into your side and then just bend over from the waist, that basically puts you in the right posture. And that is a fantastic way of describing it. I haven't found any other way, I don't think, of explaining it better than that. For me, as an exaggeration, I would always say I want to have my hands as high as I can with my elbows, as you can see, kind of into my, let's pretend it's a six pack here. So if I've got myself there, you can see I always feel with good putters that I'm going to see this nice arch in the wrist here, and we can see that palm and the inside of my left arm there, and my right hand, regardless of whatever method I want, I always want my right elbow slightly inside that. I never see good putters this way. I think it's one of the things that kills you. As soon as you get your shoulders open, i.e. to the left here, you're never going to be in the right position. So I think the more we can get the left wrist arched and in the way, the more the right's here. You can feel, I feel it really exaggerate. If you think of back in the day, Big Jack Nicklaus, and you can think about Big Jack, and then you've got Tiger's always this way, and there's a few other Strickers, and there's some guys that were really good. And Lee Jansen, who I like, US Open, really good. And also probably one of my favourite putters of all time, Brad Faxon. He had that beautiful arch here. He had no fear, said he was never scared. I mean, one of the things he said, which I really liked, was he said, why, you know, he was asked, why are you such a good putter? And he said, well, two things. One, I've got soft elbows. And the second one was, he said, I'm not afraid to miss. And actually, the more you think about it, the better that is. We're going to talk about that in the next video. He said, I'm not afraid to miss, and that is a fantastic thing to do. I think the number of times I've stood over a putt and thought, oh God, this looks like it's going to break a little bit too much, or I've got better shove this up the right because it looks like it's really going to swing left, and you miss it almost, you talk yourself out of it, as opposed to, I think we all know, once you've missed one and then you just sort of hit it second time when you're just having a knockabout and you just knock it in, you're not really thinking about it, you just stand there and just kind of tap it in. That's the stupidity, because you're not really thinking about missing. You're like more, oh, I'm going to hole it. So I think that's something that obviously, Brad, that is a very, very solid thing to have in your mindset. But we're talking about just having that arch here, and we're having ourselves set up here. So we've got our setup correct. We've got the putter face down squarely to start with. We've got our feet set up consistently. We've got the shoulder in the way, as we say. We can see the arch. We've got our wrists and elbows up. We've kind of put them in to the side, so we're up here and we're like all good putters now. So the last thing I think I see a lot of going wrong is the putter has to curve slightly onto the inside. Now, I think if you're on incredibly quick greens, and we've mentioned Augusta or whatever, I may argue that it's almost a straight line, but realistically, if I put my right hand out, damaged as it is, and swing it back, I think you can see the thumb, or my thumb, moves further than the heel or the inside of my hand. That means the same as I've said in the past. If I move my foot back, it will return to square, but it's got to curve inside because of the way I'm standing. So therefore, in a putting stroke, we've got to let the putter head curve slightly. It remains square to us, to my spine, but it's got to move slightly to the inside. So my simple thought that I've had probably 35 years, I did only start when I was 1, So that's why I look, and I did have a long paper round, but I've had, I think, I didn't start till I was about 14. I've always felt that the toe of the putter goes further than the heel. Okay, so since I was a wee nipper, I've always thought once I set my putter up and I'm here, I've always thought the toe of the putter, outside of the putter, goes further than the heel. So if you stand there and you just, if they do the same, and this is that straight line kind of idea, which is quite difficult, when you go straight line, you can see here, my elbow, it doesn't work naturally, and I've almost got to work the wrong way. I could mention a couple of putters that do that, but I'm not going to. Not for me to say. If they believe that, that's brilliant. But what I think and what I see when I watch really good putters, again, is that toe just goes slightly further than the heel. And if the toe goes further than the heel, it allows that putter to naturally, it's opening, but it's really staying square to me. So toe slightly further than heel. And I think as a closing one here, and we're going to talk a little bit in part 2, I'm going to talk about short putts on their own. But this, I would always say the length of backswing must equal the distance I want it to go. That is one of the key components. So we've talked about setup and therefore line and mechanics. We're going to talk about pace, that would be longer putting, and I'm going to talk about short putts in another putting video. So make sure you sort of follow and keep up to date on that. But the one thing I want to see is I always want to make sure that that backswing length is long enough for however far I want the ball to go. The same as if I was rolling the ball, I would want it longer to go longer and shorter to go shorter. I wouldn't go short to long and help it. That's not the natural way of throwing or bowling anything. So therein lies the key. So thanks for watching. Keep an eye out. In a week or so's time, we're going to have part 2. It'll be short putts. Then we'll talk about long putts. Then we'll talk about how much money you're earning on tour from listening to this. Now, I know you all want to see if I can hold one. This is massive pressure. Biggest pressure I've had in my whole career. Hallelujah.